in Muslim law actually ends. On the other on the other end, what we need to know is, does this happen in Hindu law? And who is actually a Hindu under the Hindu Marriage Act? What is the Special Marriage Act? What are the concepts of marriage? What do we actually need to understand? Well, when we talk about marriages, marriage is basically a universal institution and integral part of mankind. But what needs to be taken more into consideration is this integral part that we're talking about hurting someone, or is it actually causing any problems to the institution of life itself? There are a lot of laws with respect to marriages which have been not discovered yet. For example, there are colleges which are totally contractual, where you marry someone for a period of 3 years or 4 years, which is not legitimate in India. In India, when you marry someone, you're believed to be with that person for a very, very long time. And when we talk about the actual concept of it, you are basically to be with that person for a lifetime. But now, what happens when a marriage fails? How do the Hindu laws actually talk about marriages? We need to understand there are certain considerations to a valid marriage. First of all, the person should be of legal age. The person should not be mentally ill, should be of sound mind. All these things you have already studied in your classes. Then there is a probative degree of relationships that takes place. You cannot marry your blood relations, close relatives. That has been taught to you. But what has not been told in most of the classrooms in India is that registration of marriage is a compulsory act, and the Supreme Court itself in Srimati Seema versus Ashwani Kumar decided that to register a marriage, it's a compulsion. Most of our marriages are not registered. Most of us do not know people who have marriage registrations with them or the registration papers with them. What we need to understand is that there's also a difference when you take up a case of divorce for a Hindu person and for a Muslim. When we talk about Muslims, there is no codified law with respect to marriage. There is no codified law for governing the Muslim marriages, even in India. Whereas the Hindu marriages are basically governed by the Hindu Marriage Act. Whereas the Muslim Marriage Act is basically a conclusion which does not have anything codified as such. We have marriages and divorces in both the religions, actually in all the religions. When I say both the religions, we are broadly classifying Hindus as Hindus, Sikhs, Parsis, and other definitions in it. Whereas Muslims are anybody who is a Muslim, but nobody other than a Muslim. That's the definition clause of Muslim Marriage Act. Now we need to understand what are the fundamental essentials to be required for a valid marriage in Muslim law. When we talk about Muslim law, there has to be an existence of capacity to marry an individual. For example, if you cannot run a family, or if you do not have the capability to run and to fulfill the essentials of the contract, the Muslim marriage will not be valid. There has to be a necessary proposal in the marriage. There has to be a free consent of both the parties, which only started coming in the Indian society. Earlier, marriages were made by parents or family members, and they just happened. But now, the right to choose your partner has slowly and gradually started becoming a right, and people have started accepting it that you should have the right to choose your own partner. We need to understand another thing. In a Muslim marriage, it is compulsory to have a witness, because in the end, it's a contract. Now, I am specifically talking about Muslim laws right now, and we'll come to the Hindu laws after that. And after that, we'll come to the court proceedings as to divorce and other things. Now, when we talk about the validity of marriages, Muslim marriages can be classified into two, as Shahi or valid marriages. A Batli is a void marriage, and all these things we read in journal laws when we study the Muslim Marriage Act or the Muslim laws in general and family law. Now, what we need to understand is registration of Muslim marriages in India. For the registration of Muslim marriages has to be treated as a civil contract, and the law governs the Muslim Marriage Registration Act. 1981 actually talks about the registration of Muslim marriages. And it is also compulsory again to get a registration of a Muslim marriage done in India under Section 3 of this Act. Now, another question which raises is why it is compulsory to have a marriage registered? Basically, marriages are registered, as I told you, Seema Rani case. Supreme Court has mandated that all marriages that take place have to be registered. Now, when we come to interfaith marriages, in Muslims, it is prohibited for Muslims to marry outside their religion. However, under the principle of Sharia, the marriage between a Muslim and a non-Muslim woman can be not void, but it can be irregular and can be validated by conversion of women to Islam or other Abrahamic religions. So basically, if you're a Muslim woman and you marry a Abrahamic religious person, when I talk about Abrahamic religious people, basically Christians and Jewish, they both are Abrahamic religions. When we convert to them, that marriage can be validated. But now, those religions which are not Abrahamic, for example, Sikhism, Hinduism, the question still remains, will the marriage be valid under the Muslim law? So, a generalized answer is no, because it is prohibited under the Muslim personal law that you cannot marry someone who's not Abrahamic, and you cannot marry a Kitabiya in general. Now, Kitabiyas are those people who generally go and study about books, who worship men, and basically those who do idol worshipping or who have gods of their own. There is no system of messengers in the non-Abrahamic religions as such. So that's a topic in itself. Now we need to understand there was actually a dispute that if your father is a Muslim and your mother is a Hindu, would the child born out of it be legitimate? Now, legitimate child and illegitimate child in itself is a dispute. But the Supreme Court in Muhammad Salim versus Shamsayuddin actually decided that the children born out of a Muslim father and a Hindu mother will always be legitimate, and they cannot be told to be again illegitimate children born out of a failed marriage or through a void marriage. That means they have actually considered that the children born out of a marriage where the father is a Muslim and the mother is a Hindu will always be a valid marriage. Now, another thing we need to understand is there is a segment of us belonging to the Sikhism. Sikhs in general are considered as Hindus under the Hindu Marriage Act, and they're covered under the Hindu Marriage Act. Now, there is always a demand for raising a community of separate marriage legislations for the Sikhs, exclusively for Sikhs, because there has been harassment of many Sikh couples who have faced abroad over their marriage certificates under the Hindu Marriage Act, 1955. Basically, when you wear a turban, you follow a religion, there is certain association with you. But when you're called as Hindu, your registration as a Sikh becomes questionable. So a lot of people have raised questions on it, but no landmark judgment as such has come as of now to frame a separate law for Sikhs in India regulating their marriages. Now, it was in Birinder Kaur versus Union of India that the appellant filed public interest litigation in Punjab and Haryana High Court asking for a change of name of Hindu to some secular name of the four Hindu codes, including Hindu Marriage Act, and is also included member of other three communities. But this PIL did not turn out to be fruitful as such. After getting dismissed, the same petitioner appealed in the Supreme Court in 2012, further demanding a justification for the applicability of Hindu marriage laws on Sikhs. In response, Apex Court questioned the Indian government whether they could call the acts a Buddhist Marriage Act and apply it to the remaining religions. Again, we had a prime minister who was a Sikh in 2012, that is Manmohan Singh, And his government basically replied that the Anand Marriage Act bill got a assent on the same by the 10th president, Srimati Pratibha Patil. Basically, Anandkar Marriage Act was passed, but still the registration of marriage of Sikhs happens under the special marriage, under the Hindu Marriage Act. They can register their marriage under this act, which is a reflection of colonial era's 1990s, the 1909's, the Anand Marriage Act introduced by the British to give legal validity to Anand Karaj, but the essentials of Sikh marriage were actually reiterated by the Supreme Court in the case of Keval Ram and others versus Himachal Pradesh administration. The position of Punjab and Haryana High Court in Resham Singh versus Kartal Singh, wherein the court upheld that 4 lavans by the groom, followed by the bride around the holy Guru Granth Sahib in the presence of chanting of hymns composed by the fourth Guru of Sikhism, Guru Ram Das Ji, is an essential practice of ceremoniating a Anand Karj. Now there is a similarity with us. There are lamas in Sikhs and there are Feras of the Satpadi in Hindus. In both cases, you go around in a circle. In they go around the Guru Granth Sahib, whereas in the other part we go around Agni. That is the Havan that's taking place, and we take the Feras. Now, basically, the Anand Karaj in itself needs to know what Anand Karaj is. Anand Karaj means a blissful event. Now, what we need to understand is that we have talked about the Hindu Marriage Act, we've talked about the Muslim law, we've talked about Sikhism. What we need to understand is Christians are the second largest religious minority in India after Muslims. And the Christian marriages in India are governed by the Christian Marriage Act. And Section 4 of the Christian Marriage Act provides the conduction of Christian weddings under the provision of Christian Marriage Act. Now, what we need to understand is we have understand what are the basic marriage laws in India. We have Parsi laws itself, then we have the Special Marriage Act, which is a secular matrimonial law in India. Now we need to understand what is registration of marriage, what are the requirements of registration of marriage, how does that happen? Anybody who gets married in India can get married by 2 ways. Either you conduct the religious ceremonies and get married, or you go to the court and you get in the procedure of a court marriage. The official procedure of a court marriage is you file an application for registration of marriage and for conducting a court marriage. Then you get a period within 3 to 6 months to get your marriage registered in front of a magistrate. And then the marriage is registered officially and a certificate of marriage is issued to you. But in a country where we are at times facing problems in love marriages, what people do is they first conduct a pseudo marriage. That pseudo marriage is basically in Hindus mainly governed by the Arya Samaj Marriage Act or the Arya Samaj Act. In this, what happens is they conduct a marriage in which they click your pictures and you get a registration certificate from the Arya Samaj Mandir for your marriage. After that, that marriage certificate itself entails for a registration certificate of the marriage from the state government. Unfortunately, this process has been used in a very wrong manner. A lot of people marry today and they want to file a divorce after 5 days because they realize they married in a haphazard manner. So we need to actually come up with an idea as to how to counsel these clients. Once the marriage has happened, you can go for 2 things. One is a divorce, another is the annulment of the marriage. Now, what is the difference between a divorce and annulment? Annulment basically means that the marriage itself was not valid. You just say that, okay, fine, we did this and we don't want it anymore. Let's just annul the marriage. This generally happens when the 1 year to the marriage has not been completed. Now, when a divorce client generally comes to you, he's full of emotions. He is full of anger at times. And generally, there are problems which are of very small nature, which can actually not be considered as cruelty at large, nor can they be decided as in what the issue for the marriage separation is, sometimes people want to voluntarily end a marriage. Sometimes people want to contest a divorce because they are not happy with their parents, with their partners. Sometimes the marriage is actually dissolved because of the illegal and invalidated relationships of a man or a woman with another person. So now, when a divorce by mutual consent comes to us, we first need to ask the parties, are you both ready for the divorce? If they say yes, then you get the wakalatnama signed, which generally we do not learn in the classrooms, that what a wakalatnama is. Wakalatnama is the basic document which is required to file a case in the courtroom, which gives the advocate the authority to fight the case for his clients. So I'll tell you something, when I passed out from law school, I never knew what a wakalatnama was. I drafted the petition and just went to the court itself, stating that, okay, fine, this is my petition, please file it. He said, where is your wakalatnama? So you guys need to understand, if you want to be practice ready advocates, the procedural aspect of law is much tougher than the theoretical aspect of law, because the procedural aspect actually asks for perfection. Page numbering is separate, the text numbers go away, the size of the font goes away, your petition gets dismissed. You file the petition on legal size paper in place of A4 size paper, you get an objection on it. Now, when the clients come up and they tell you that we want to go for a mutual consent divorce, you first ask them, was there any gifts that were given from the side of the wife to the husband, or any gifts that were given from the side of the husband to the wife? And once they give the list of the ornaments or the gifts and those that can be returned, you put that down on a piece of paper, and in your petition you write that they want to mutually give back all this. And after this petition is filed, they promise not to file any criminal or civil cases against each other with respect to the marriage. In case of a mutual consent divorce, we file the petition in the in the family court, and when we go to the ADJ or the family judge, they basically accept the petition and give us a period of 6 months for cooling down. In this cooling down period, the procedure is that they go for mediation or conciliation, which is a set procedure, and you need to show that you have tried to talk to each other, but it has not worked out. And after 6 months, generally, if you have followed the due procedure of law, that is, you've gone through the mediations, you have gone through the conciliations, you're granted a divorce. But now comes the Hindi serials and the Hindi teleshop into question, that is the actual divorce petitions. The contested divorce in India is nothing less than a movie show, because the allegations that are going to come on you are mostly fictional if you're from the side of a guy and the marriage is more than 8 years. Same happens if the guy files a case of harassment on the woman. Mostly lawyers in India are having a juicy when it comes to somebody divorce to you and he says that a divorce and the petition has been filed. You already know that a domestic violence case has been filed, a dowry case has been filed, a harassment case has been filed, and all the family members have already been accused in the same case. Because that is what people have adopted as a practice to generate some force on the other side to give a divorce and to get down some amount of money. But to disprove the facts, the criminal aspect of it comes into it. Now we need to understand that how matrimonial laws in practical aspect are joint to the criminal aspect of law. When we talk about marriage itself comes as a criminal act. When we talk about dowry, it's a criminal offense. Generally, in a contested divorce case, a lot of FIRs and charge sheets are filed. Generally, people are even arrested. So you need first procure a bail, which is an anticipatory bail for your client if you're from the side of the accused, so that even if a decision is passed, he cannot go behind the bars without a prior notice of 48 hours to 72 hours. Now, when the divorce cases go into the court, we first start with the arguments. No, that is a misconception. prepare a petition with all the evidences we have, and we give a written complaint and we give it. Then the evidences and the witnesses come and give their statements. After that, we come up with the arguments which go on for at least 1.5 years in India. Can be delayed more. If you think that justice is more important than the fees that you're going to get for every day's hearing, then yes, I've already always said this. It is not the judiciary which is slow. It is us, the lawyers, who want more dates so that the cash flow keeps on coming. Judiciary tries to finish up cases fast, but it is us who take longer dates because we believe, and it is a conception in Indian law and Indian legal fraternity at the lower courts, that more the dates, more the money. But it is better to resolve the cases on time so that speedy justice becomes a norm. Now, and three things. If your petition does not have a memo of the cases, you cannot actually come up with something sensible. Now, another thing that needs to come in is, what does a petition look like? So I'll be showing you a petition which we filed some time back, and I'll be displaying it on the screen and explaining it to you what the petition basically looks like. Is my screen visible now?
Yes, sir, we can see your screen.
So now this is basically a basic notice that we share. So I'll be hiding the name of the people. So basically, we first tell them that when they were married and was it the marriage according to the Vedic rites or not, whether the person is a Hindu and both of them follow under the Hindu Marriage Act. After that, we come that what happens and how things happen, and when you discover what the reasons is, because in this particular case, it is a illicit marriage that took place. So that is how we go forward with it. Now that's the basic notice. Now we need to understand what a divorce petition looks like and how divorces in India take place. Now, when we talk about divorce at large, I told you already there are two kinds of divorces. One is the divorce that is mutual consent divorce. Another one is a divorce which is as per the contention of the law, where both the parties contend to take a divorce. Now, we need to understand what do we actually do when there has been adultery in the case by husband, by the wife, and the husband has to file a petition. Now, this is basically known as the petition by husband for dissolution of marriage with damages against co-respondents by reasons of adultery. So basically, first you'll have to write the name of the court where the issue is taking place. After that is done, you come to the next part, that is the name of the petitioner, and then the name of the respondent, and then you need to put in formally, this is the first part, which is called as the memo of the parties. When the memo of the parties are basically done, then you have to write that parties who are domiciled, where are they domiciled, what faiths do they follow, and when they were actually married. After the marriage part is done, then you come down that they have cohabited and they have consummated their marriage, and the said wife has gone at various places, whatever the facts of the case are. Then during the years of the proceedings, you first basically write down what all is going through and how things have to happen. Now, After that, we need to come down that was there any issue with partners, or they have actually gone through for a dissolution of marriage before. And we need to again tell that the has there have been an act of adultery. Adultery, yes, has been decriminalized, but it is still a part and a ground for dissolution of marriage. Now, after that, we have to put down the affidavit. This affidavit basically says that you name, some age, occupation, whatever, and the statements of the paragraphs are actually verified by you, and you know that they have been written in a proper manner. And the affidavit basically is the protection for the lawyer and for you when it comes to the proper application of law. Now we need to understand nullity or annulment of marriage. We need to understand that Section 24(1) of the Special Marriage Act talks about nullability. And doctrine of the nullability basically means that your marriage becomes null and void. Similarly, in this case also, the first part that we need to talk about is the petitioners. Who are the petitioners? Then we need to talk about who are respondents, that is the memo of the parties. After that, put in the petitioner who is so and so, the state and place of residence. Then we put in the name of the husband, name of the wife, married, unmarried, age, place of residence, before marriage and after marriage. Both of the conditions are put in. After that, we need to tell them that is there any child that has been born out of that marriage? What are the facts that for which the nullity is to be sought? Has there been any previous proceedings with respect to the marriage or not? And then we need to put in the name. If there have been any proceedings, we need to specify it. And then if there has been any delay, then we need to file a application for condonation of delay. Now what we need to understand is there any ground for the relief should not be granted or should it be granted? That is how it happens. Now again the verification part comes in. So now coming back to the main part, we need to talk about as to what happens when the marriages fail. When marriages fail, we need to understand what are the matrimonial rights in practical aspects, because I don't know about other states and cities, but when it comes to Delhi, we get a lot of cases in which there are marriages of LGBT and Q. That is the community which has been new to the country. Now, one of the landmark judgments that most of you must have read, that is Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India. It basically states that the sexual minorities in India, the judgment actually considered LGBTQ as a sexual minority in India, and it stated that in India, the given rights to the people under 377 have been partially removed, and 377 has actually been legalized, and you can do the same sex marriages now. But unfortunately, as of now, there is no law with respect to marriages of LGBTQ, whether they be covered under the Hindu Marriage Act, under the Special Marriage Act, or the Christian Marriage Act, or the Muslim Marriage Act. We do not know. What needs to be understand is that the appeals are still going on. An appeal in the Kerala High Court by married gay couple has been filed demanding for legal legitimacy of their marriage, and the court has notified the center as the state on the same. The matter is still under consideration. But what needs is, why do we actually have this kind of discrimination when LGBTQs have already been legalized in India? When the marriages and the relationships have been legalized in India, we do have a law which talks about registration of marriages. What is the idea of these marriages? These marriages happen in the same way. Essentials of the marriage are already validated. There is a satpadi, or basically the idea of actually being taken into consideration. Now what we need to take into consideration is, should these marriages be legalized in India? How can something be illegal when it has been decriminalized? and when there has been amendment to it. Now there have been a lot of counter petitions to it too. Some of them say that the judgment is just saying that being with the same sex is legitimate, but it does not legalize the Hindu sanctity of a marriage, which says that marriage can only happen between a man and a woman. Will this marriage come under the Special Marriage Act? That is the Secular Marriage Act of India. And on the same hand, another debate comes into it. Should we have uniform laws for all, the uniform irrespective of religion? Now, when we talk about it, the concept of marriage in India has always been between a man and a woman, and never between a man and a man, woman and a woman, a transgender and a woman, or a transgender and a transgender. So we need to actually understand how it happens. And this is a debatable topic. We do not have a lot of judgments on this as of now. But yes, I'm pretty sure for LGBT community legitimate their marriages. Now coming back, what happens when Indian marries a foreigner in India? What will happen in that case? When you marry someone outside India, the Foreign Marriage Act or the Foreigner Marriage Act applies. But what happens when you marry an Indian? When you are an Indian and you marry a foreigner in India, what law actually takes place? The law that takes place is very simple. The law is the Special Marriage Act. Basically, what we need to know is that even in the Special Marriage Act, the essentials are same for every law in India. Basically, if you have to enter into a contract, you have to be mentally stable. If you have provisions for the marriage, you have to be willing to do it. And when there has to be a person from a foreign country, you need to have a NOC from the requisite embassy and a valid visa so that that individual actually can go further and come to a conclusion that the marriage is validated. Now, we need to come forward. We need to understand that when do we actually start with the procedure of a divorce? Can divorce petitions be filed straight away? Well, the answer is no. Before you file a divorce, you need to intimate the other person through a notice as to what the issue is and why do you seek the divorce, and you need to give them a time and you need to tell them that this is what you have done and that is why I'm asking for a divorce. In case the divorce is not mutual and you don't want a mutual divorce to happen, you first need to file a complaint for the crime that has happened against you, because till the time an investigation is not done into a crime, how can we decide whether a charge has been framed and the crime has actually taken place or not? Now we need to understand that when we send a notice, generally the period of the notice is 30 days. After the first notice, if we do not get any replies, we go for the second notice. And after the second notice, with the receipt of the notice, that is the stamp that we get from the post office, that is the receipt. I'll show you one, that how it looks like. You save that with you so that you can prove it to the court that you've actually gone. This is what the post looks like when we talk about the marriages at large. So when you get this receipt, you will actually tell the court, see, this is the delivery report of the notices, and the notices were actually delivered to the individual, but we did not get any reply from them, and we have already exhausted all our legal remedies. Therefore, now we have approached this honorable court to get an suitable decree of divorce for ourselves. When the evidences are going on, if you are the earning hand of the family, you will be the one giving maintenance. There have been cases in which wife has been directed to give maintenance to the husband because it was the wife who was running the household at large. Now, what we need to understand is, apart from the maintenance part of it, maintenance generally is granted by the courts if the wife is not able to maintain herself. Maintenance is also denied in cases where both the parties are capable of maintaining each other and do not need each other to maintain each other. For example, if you are earning 1,50,000 per month and your husband is earning 1,30,000 per month, the court generally decides that you are not in a need to be maintained by your husband. Sometimes maintenance also happens when people are in such a condition where the wife has actually been abused to such an extent that she's been put on the roads itself. So the courts also direct the accused to pay for the accommodation of the wife. Along with the accommodation, they say that you need to maintain the children also. You need to talk about various aspects of that. In some cases, there have been brutalities that have happened on wives. Wives have been burnt down, wives have been punished for not bringing in dowry. And that is the term that the individuals have used in the court of law in front of me, that we have punished the wife for not bringing in dowry, which means that we have legalized the concept of dowry, whereas in the codified law we have stated that dowry is a crime, but the cultural aspect of it, the practical aspect of it is that we have made people believe that dowry is important. Now, what happens when a client comes to you? When the client will come to you, you need to be a very good listener. If you don't listen to the client, you will not be able to solve what the client is going under. More than a lawyer, the client of a domestic abuse or a client with respect to physical abuse in a marriage needs someone who listens to them first, who understands what they're going through. More than your IQ, as a matrimonial lawyer, your EQ has to be higher. When I say IQ, it is the intelligent quotient. EQ is your emotional quotient. Your emotional quotient has to be high. If your emotional quotient is not high, you'll not be able to understand the issues that have been faced by the client and what she has faced or he has faced. And when you don't know that, you will not be able to resolve the issues as such. Now, there are fraudulent marriages also. For example, one of my clients was married to a Hindu lady who said that she's a Hindu and it is her first marriage. But after 1.5 years of the marriage, they realized that the lady was a Muslim and she already has children with the first marriage. So when the person got to know, the lady took the daughter born out of the marriage with her and said, "Do whatever you want to do. I am not going to marry you. I will be staying with my husband." And the Aadhaar card of this lady was by the name of a Hindu lady. Now, in this case, it's a criminal breach of trust first. There has been a case of misrepresentation of documents. They have cheated the government of India by stating the wrong religion. There has been no reports of conversion to Hinduism. And the daughter will now be facing, because who has always been brought up as a Hindu since birth, all of a sudden gets into an environment of Muslim law, would that be cruelty for her needs to be decided. If the case is vice versa also, it has to be decided whether religious change can actually turn into cruelty or not. Now, in this battle between the mother and the father, it is the child who's actually suffering. So you need to understand the rights of the children also born out of these marriages. A failed marriage is not just a failed institution, it is actually a questionable life for many children who are out there. These children suffer a lot. They lack basic family rights. For example, they don't know how families sit, how they talk. They face psychological traumas. As per the Indian Institute of Psychological Research, a lot of these children face psychological traumas born out of relationships of marriage, of a broken marriage. These individuals or children born have a lot of issues with respect to their trust. They are generally not able to trust people. They are basically think that these marriages are not sensible enough to run, and they believe that the sanction of marriage is just some facade that takes place and it has all the issues with it. So when we talk about the practical aspect of it, we also need to know as to what goes on when the marriages are broken. After a marriage is broken, you get a divorce degree. And when you get a divorce degree, you basically state that fine, I was married, but I am no more married to the same individual. But there is also a degree of separation. When you file a degree for separation, you basically start staying separately, but both the partners cannot legally marry again. In degree of separation, you basically say that, okay, fine, we are married, we are restituting our conjugal rights, and we are separate. But our bond as husband and wife is only led to separation. It is not a divorce at large. So, in case of separation, judicial separation, you cannot marry another person because you're still in the wedlock with that individual, but you have judicially separated from each other. Now, what we need to understand is the child custody laws in India. Now, there are separate laws for custody of child in separate marriages. Now, like the case I discussed with you, we need to understand which law will actually apply to you. As an individual, you would say, no, there is a marriage between a Muslim and a Hindu. So it is not a valid marriage under the Muslim law. So we cannot take the recourse of a Muslim law. Then we will come up and state ki yaar ye is, in this case what has happened. Now we need to understand if the marriage took place as per the Hindu rituals and the Satpadi was conducted, it obviously is a Hindu marriage. Because when the essentials of Hindu marriage are validated, it becomes a Hindu marriage. Now, when we talk about these child custody laws, we need to understand what section talks about child custody and under Hindu Marriage Act. Section 26 talks about custody of child under Hindu Marriage Act, which is the law governing the Hindu marriages. Section 38 of the Special Marriage Act talks about child custody. That is basically a person or a child born out of a court marriage, and this court marriage is between individuals of different faiths, the Special Marriage Act can take place. Section 41 of the Divorce Act also deals with the custody of children. And Section 43 also talks about nullity of marriage under the Special Marriage Act. Now we need to understand what are the criminal aspects of matrimonial laws again. When we file a dowry petition and a petition that domestic violence has happened and domestic violence has taken place, the part also comes in 488A. When it comes in, the situation is all on evidence. The questions are, we need to understand how things happen and what is going to affect us, not going to affect us. It is not the violence that has happened, it is the emotional trauma for which we never pay back to the victim. The years lost due to the trials are much more sad than the actual crime itself, because once you have been faced by a heinous crime, you have to repeat that instance in the courts again and again, and the trauma that gets to you basically ends up in people taking back the criminal cases because they're so traumatized by coming back and forth to the courts and talking about the same things that they realize that it is of no use to be traumatizing and punishing my own self than getting punishment for someone else. Now we need to understand what is adoption upon the Hindu laws and the matrimonial laws. What do we do in the mediations and why mediations are important? Generally, it is stated that when the elders talk in a family, they talk some sense into us. And we realize that the values and the talks that are happening might resolve issues. Sometimes what happens is there is sexual incompetence of one of the partners in the marriage, which also is a cause for, abuse, which is also a kind of cruelty and harassment which is happening. So you can also take the ground of annulment of a marriage or a divorce if your partner is not sexually competent. If your partner is epileptic and he has not informed you that before marriage and you have married him and that epilepsy is causing you some problem, that can also be a ground for divorce. Now, There has been a case in which a husband has actually been granted the decree of divorce because his wife has actually been telling him that you're too fat and you eat too much. The words used exactly were tum mote ho, tum suwar ki tarah khate ho. So this term was actually taken to the court of law, and the court of law realized that it is actually causing emotional and psychological trauma to the individual, and the ground for the divorce are valid, and he should be granted a divorce. Now again, if the marriage is not without consent, then also divorces can happen. But now taking this plea in the Indian system itself becomes a problem, because in Indian system you're generally arranged marriage. So the concept of consent itself deviates. When I say it deviates, what is consent? Consent would be that you agree to marry, but sometimes people are forced to marry. That okay, fine, this is the individual you need to marry, and this is how things are going to happen, and this is how you're going to go forward with it. But now we need to realize, if this happens, would any marriage in India be any arranged marriage in India be open to the idea of marriage without consent? So consent basically needs to be an important part in everything. You need cannot be under duress when you enter into a contract nor into a relationship. But another big problem in now that has started coming up is that is rapes on pretext of marriage, which shall also be covered under the matrimonial laws, because living relationships have now come under the matrimonial aspects of law. There have been cases in which women and men under living relationships have been considered as regular husband and wives. As in, they say that it is the duty of the living partner to maintain the other partner, because they're living in such a manner that they are actually living a life of husband and wife. And the High Court, I don't remember the state, but I guess it is the Kerala High Court, which has stated this, that living relationships are more like a wedlock. Rapes on pretext of marriage are a very common plea which are taken in the court of law, in which what happens is that you meet on any of these sites, or you meet in any of the functions in your school, colleges, and you decide, fine, that I'm going to get married to you, but we need to take a step forward and realize what we're going to do. And then you end up into an intimate relationship. And after that is done, the individual refuses to marry you. In that case, rape on pretext of marriage comes into place, and it becomes a heinous crime. But again, it needs to be realized how many of these cases are actually true and how many of these are actually false. Because at times, this section is also used for extorting money from the other party. Because laws in India are not gender neutral when it comes to sexual offenses as such. Generally, there is no specific law for men being raped in India. So when we talk about this, we need to come back to the aspect that if you have been forced and compelled to get into an intimate relationship against your will, but whatever happened there was consensual, how to prove that it was unconsensual and it was forced upon you? So the concept of marriage, or rapes on context of marriage itself, is a big matrimonial dispute, which generally in India has become a habit that people end up marrying the individual. But would these marriages succeed? It's itself a practical question that we need to understand. A marriage which is born out of intimidating, extortionary behavior, will that work out? Will there be any harassment in that marriage? Will that marriage be successful? What would be the actual aspects to that marriage are actually questionable. Now, when we go much further, we need to understand that, has there been miscarriage of justice in matrimonial laws? Yes. Every time decisions are delayed, every time the decision takes a longer period of time to take place, justice is miscarriage. We need to understand that justice delayed is actually justice denied, because the fast track idea of justice needs to be taken into consideration, because if we delay the time that we are putting in this, we are actually going to destroy the very structure of the legal system, which is being already misled by us. We are saying that we We are basically working towards a faster nation. We are working towards a better nation. But till the time the judicial system in India is not fast enough, justice is not delivered on time, we do not expect a better system to come into place. But yes, on the same hand, a haphazard justice system cannot ensure justice itself. So, just for the sake of speedy justice, you cannot just miscarry a trial. Now, another aspect that was basically banned in India basically was surrogacy in marriages. There are a lot of marriages in which children are not born. These marriages itself become tensed at times because having a child becomes an essential for some individuals. But surrogacy laws in India have changed a lot, and it in itself is in-depth study when we understand what surrogacy is, how surrogacy laws work, what these several countries have with respect to surrogacy. Now, what we need to understand is when we talk about surrogacy, why should surrogacy not be legalized in India? If we have IVFs in India, why not surrogacy? Well, people have actually started renting wombs outside India to get a surrogate child. Now we need to understand what surrogacy actually is. When we talk about surrogacy, surrogacy basically means that your child is carried by a third person in her womb so that you do not have to carry that child. Rather than a necessity, it became a luxury in India. When people didn't want to, uh, carry the child themselves, they used to hire a surrogate mother, and that surrogate mother used to have the child and carry the child and used to give birth to that child. And these surrogate mothers were paid for the same. So the ethical questions with respect to surrogacy were actually questioned. But should it not be so that if a person is ready to carry a child for you, he should actually be ready for that? And what should be the contractual obligation of a surrogate mother? Because she's actually carried the child for you and she's the one who's giving birth to the child. Would she be considered as the mother of the child? Well, that question has been raised in many cases, and the answer is no, because the child is born out of two other individuals, and the surrogate mother is just a carrier. So in that case, it has always been stated that whether this is a true contention that that person is just a machine to give children now. So this question also comes as part of the matrimonial laws because there have been claims of maintenance by surrogate mothers to individuals that see, I am the mother of your child. Now you should maintain me. So these petitions generally have been dismissed. Now, we need to understand again, where do we go when the marriages fail? Can marriages work through mediations? Can marriages work through counseling? And as an advocate, what should be your duty when someone with matrimonial issues comes to you? Matrimonial issues do not always mean that you need to rush towards a divorce. You can go for restitution of conjugal rights for the beginning, and then you can go into mediation, talk to your clients, and counsel them for some time and see if the marriage can work. When you break a relationship which is happily married and is breaking for reasons which are now valid, you do not feel happy as an individual because you're breaking an institution which was running very well. Now, when we talk about the implications of divorces in the society, it gives you a bad name in the society because that taboo with respect to divorces is still existent. When people come to you, they're like, sir, divorcee ka hamare upar thappa lag jayega. That is the language they use. But is it good to be in a marriage which is not successful, or is it good to be a divorcee in place of that? When you are divorced once, your life starts again. But obviously, people in the society see you with a different eye. They'll be like, oh, she got divorced or he got divorced. There must be some problem with them. They must be having temperamental issues. But divorces do not always happen because of temperamental issues. They happen because of hygiene issues. There is a divorce which was granted by one of the courts in Delhi because the husband did not bathe regularly. He bathed once in a month, and that was a hygienic condition due to which the wife appealed for a divorce and the divorce was granted. Now, when we come back to the aspects of divorce, when you file the petition, what should your arguments be like? When you're going for a divorce petition, you should have the facts in hand. Your facts should be crisp, your facts should be genuine and backed by some evidence. Because anything fictitious that you write in the divorce petition would go against you. You need to prove every word that you've written in the petition. You need to have if a criminal case has been filed against your client, the first step you need to take is go for an anticipatory bail. Because if your client is behind the bars, you cannot protect him because his basic rights are already denied. Because he's behind bars only for one reason, that he is just an accused. He has not been proved guilty till now. And you are not guilty until proven. And when we talk about the systems of law, you need to counsel your client in such a way that they realize what are the questions that are going to be asked to them in the court of law. The trauma of questions in the court of law and when the allegations are flirted upon you are not easy. Somebody would call you characterless, somebody would judge your piousness, somebody would judge your intimidating parts, somebody would be questioning what happened when you were in the room alone with your husband, somebody would be talking about something else, somebody would be telling you that you were not good enough for your wife in the other manners, someone would be telling you that you actually tried to kill your wife and your parents along with you tried to kill your wife, which may take a toll on you. So you need to counsel your client in such a manner that, see, marriages and divorces do take place and this is part of it, but you need to realize that you are the correct person in this case and you need to understand that the divorce that is going to take place has to go away and it has to end the miscarriage of marriage which has taken place, because the relationship is getting a psychological trauma on you and you are suffering. It is better to end it. Once the individual is ready, then you can proceed with the divorce. You need to make them understand the implications of divorce. You cannot just go and file a divorce. That is what mostly is happening in court of laws. People come with you, I want a divorce, and you just prepare a divorce petition and file it. But I do not think that is the correct way to do it. You first need to understand the need of the divorce, and you need to tell your client what the divorce means, how the divorce is going to happen, what are things are to be questioned, how you're going to be challenged in the court, what the judges are going to ask. After that, when the divorce happens, you can tell them that now it's a new start of life, and obviously do not forget to take your fees, because no service that you give is social service, because it's a profession that we are doing. And now when we have to do and enlighten people about matrimonial laws, best thing that all of us can do is go ask people to register their marriages. When their marriages are registered, they have a basic idea that they can go forward with getting married again after the divorce, and the registered marriages have a better chance of dissolution than a non-registered marriage, because it becomes easier to prove the marriage. And that's how we talk about it. Now I am going to talk about other things, like for example, there are times when the go through system has been a big problem in many states, for example Rajasthan and Haryana. So does the Hindu Marriage Act prohibit marriages due to a gotra? Well, the answer is specifically no. It is not codified in that manner. But yes, close degree of blood relationship is always a void marriage. Now, what we need to understand is, should the kangaroo courts deciding whether a marriage is void or not, end or not? In most of the villages, matrimonial disputes do not go to the court. They're decided within the panchayats. In the panchayat, they decide that this is the fault of the lady, this is the fault of the person, this is what you need to do. And the marriages are again put forth. But these individuals suffer again. Should their suffering be there because we as a system, as a judicial system, have not been able to come up with something which can safeguard their rights? Should these courts, which are basically not even courts, they are just administrative bodies, be allowed to take justice in their hands? Should they be giving justice and decisions in matrimonial cases is a big question. These questions have been asked again and again, but no answer as such has been given to them. Now, another thing is, what should we do if the marriage has already failed and you have gone through a lot of trauma and the justice is not happening? The trials have not started, courts are taking a lot of time, and you're a woman. In this case, we need to go to the National Human Rights Commission and write a letter to them. Along with that, we need to go to the Commission for Women in India. We need to write to them so that a partial inquiry from their side can also start. There are a lot of religious beliefs in some states of India where patriarchy does not exist and matriarchy exists. For example, in the states of Northeast, it is the bride who takes the barat and the dhula becomes the ghar jamai in a lot of cases. Ghar jamai means that the husband is actually staying with at the house of the wife, and he is the one whose doli goes away. That is the one goes to the wife's house and starts staying there. That is where the local laws come into place, and the tribal laws with respect to matrimony are much different than the codified laws that we have. Now, the marriages in Northeast, generally, the majority of population is Christian. But this population was again further divided into tribes. Now, the tribal matrimonial laws itself are very different. So, in that case, when a divorce case comes in, you need to talk about those matrimonial laws of the tribal people. Also, their rituals may not have Satpadi in them. Their rituals may have something else to codify a marriage. So we need to understand where the case is coming from, who the individuals are in the case, and how it has to go forward with it. Similarly, there are generally marriages between Hindus and Sikhs in a very common, it is a very common practice. And there are two feras that take place. One is the Lama and one is the normal Satpadi that takes place. And then the marriage is concluded. Now the two marriages have taken place. Should what should be the resort that you need to take so that if there is a matrimonial dispute that comes up, should be easily resolved and the divorce should not again get into the question of law whether it was a Hindu marriage or a Sikh marriage. In that case, it is very easy and a very normal process to get your marriage registered so that you can question and divorce the same marriage under the Special Marriage Act or the Hindu Marriage Act or the Anand Karaj Act, whichever act is possible and under which your marriage is registered. When this happens, the concept of marriage becomes bit codified and easier. So that's the basics of practical aspects of matrimonial laws. We can now have a small interaction with all of you so that you can have your doubts with respect to the practical aspects of law, and you can just start asking questions one by one and we can talk about it.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you're
Good
audible.
afternoon, sir. I'm Akshit from BLLB. So my doubt
Hi.
was that even though marital rape is not a part of IPC, can it be a ground for divorce?
Well, that depends on how you interpret it. For example, there is no codified law with respect to it, nor do we have any big judgments on it. But yes, there is sexual abuse in certain cases has been granted as a ground for divorce. For example, if the sexual intercourse by the husband or the wife is forcing you into physical trauma, emotional trauma, causing you hurt of a degree, then yes, divorce is granted in that case.
Thank you, sir.
Grounds are very simple under nullity. Basically, nullity can happen if you are not positively doing something, if there is the person is mentally challenged, if the person is having some other issues, then the nullity can happen under the Special Marriage Act. Special Marriage Act grounds for nullity we've discussed, and now we need to understand what nullity is actually. Nullity basically nullifies everything. So now we need to understand that either party has a living spouse already becomes a ground for nullity under the Special Marriage Act. Then when either of the parties is no, I am not capable of giving a valid consent, it becomes nullity. The marriage becomes ready for nullity. If the person is suffering from a mental illness or is mentally unfit, then it becomes a ground for nullity. If you are not able to procrastinate children, then also it can become a ground for nullity. Harshiva, you can also please ask the question.
Good afternoon, sir. So
You
my
will have to be a
question,
bit louder. I'm not able to hear you.
sure, sir. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're audible now.
Yes, sir. So my question was that from the ancient times to even when the marriage laws were codified or amended, there has been a significant change in the roles of women in the society. So, is it safe to say that the legislative and subsequently the judiciary has accepted the particular status and adopted itself to the like with the changing roles of women and men who are parties to such marriage?
See, we need to understand that in another manner now. For example, before the marriages were codified in India, we had Manusmriti. And Manusmriti had its own laws with respect to sati and everything. So that all has obviously gone. So obviously that is done, and that issue is not there anymore. When we talk about equality or equity before law, yes, that has come in. But no, actual idea of equity is still missing. There are ways in which women are still being harassed in a very bad manner in the Indian society. Just because they were married to the wrong man, they suffer a lifetime of torture and trauma. And when we talk about neighbors, that is Bangladesh, where Hindus are there, women are treated even worse because Hindus are a minority there. Similarly, in other countries, uh, also the role of women has come in. Yes, we have seen a president in India who's a woman. We've seen a prime minister who's a woman. We've seen chief ministers who are women. We have seen that permanent commission has been granted to women in the Indian army now. But has the law evolved with it? I don't think so. Law is evolving day by day. Precedents are there, but the codified law and the substantial law has not changed as such to a great extent. Yes, we have become more, what should I say, uh, close to the idea of justice for women and women rights. After Nirbhaya, the amendments which took place are commendable, but it took another Nirbhaya to do it. It took another heinous crime for us to open an eyes, whereas it was the duty of the policymakers to come up with laws before a crime actually took place. Next, please.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So talking about degree of separation. So if a couple who was granted degree of separation, can they file for divorce? And even
Yes,
if
they
they,
can. They
so
can.
sir, what are the grounds that they need to prove for that? I mean, living separately or
After a divorce, you basically need to state that we have not consummated the marriage for so long, and now we don't want to live together. And it was the degree of separation was put in for a very simple reason that we could not live together. And now, even after the cooling down period of such a long period of time, we have been staying separately. It's not working out, so we need to file a divorce.
so what are the issues that might, the couple might face even after living separately? So, I mean,
There
what
are
are
a
the
lot of
grounds?
issues. See, in a society where Tinder and Hinge are very popular, we meet people, new people every day, and nobody knows when you're gonna fall in love again. So maybe when you're separated, you find a new partner and you want to marry them. So to marry them, you'll actually have to go for a divorce. So in that case, if the other person is not willing to give you a divorce, you can't have a divorce. Somebody wrote a question. Can you please speak it out because I am not able to access the messages here.
Hello, sir. I'm Avigyan, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah,
So
you're
my
audible.
question is: suppose that in a family, a woman has been tortured, all right, and the woman's brother comes to know about this, and so is it necessary that and the in-laws where she's staying, they are not letting her out of a house just because of the fear that she might go and complain? So, sir, is it like legit that the brother goes and files a complaint, or is it compulsory for the woman also to go and file a complaint?
No, the brother can go file a complaint stating that his sister has not been able to come out of the house. There has been wrongful confinement and she has been abused, and he's got to know about it. But obviously, a complaint by the person itself would be of more importance.
Okay, thank you.
Pundarik, please, your question. There is Sarawar and Pundarik, you've raised your hand.
Yes, sir. So there are a lot of cases where to them against man or fraud they use harassment. There are a lot of cases like that. But for men, for their protection, like, do we have any standards? Do we have any guidelines for that?
We do not have any written guidelines for that, to be very honest, and that's really sad. But abuse of law by women is there, and that cannot be denied. But that itself cannot be an idea that women always abuse the law. So there are cases wherein one of these, most of you must have seen this Facebook page, Men's Helpline and all, and they talk about all of this against feminism and how a woman actually told someone that he was harassed and all. In that case, you need to have a good argument that you can actually go on further and talk about it. You can disprove the allegations on you. Your cross examination has to be strong. You need to file a counter FIR and a counter complaint. If the counter complaint is not accepted, then you'll have to go under section 156(3) to file an FIR. So those are the procedures which are there, but there is no codified law for the same. Nothing that I am aware of as of now. Maybe there must have been one or two precedents which I've not read. Next, please.
Yeah.
Who's next?
So may I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, actually, sir, what if a Muslim man marries a woman and the woman turns Muslim, but after the marriage she turns her religion back to Hindu, as the right to freedom of religion is also our fundamental right, right? So will the marriage be considered valid?
The marriage will be valid at the time of the marriage. Both were Muslims, and the marriage were accepted under witnesses, and the marriage was registered by the Maulana, and his, nikah nama was written down. So that would be a marriage valid.
Thank you.
But yes, it might have some restrictions to it. The community may tell the person to this. What do you call it? They call it bedakli from the religion. So you might be, outcasted from the religion after converting into a Hindu. That is possible. But if both of them were Muslims during the marriage, that would be a valid marriage.
Thank you, sir.
Next, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, what's your name, please?
Sir, my name is Pundarik.
Yeah, please ask your question.
Sir, my question is, what is the total ratio of money that is provided to the wife?
I'm not able to hear you. You will have to speak a bit louder, please.
So what is the total ratio of money that is provided to the wife after the divorce, and even what the husband is the only person who is earning for his family? Is it mandatory for the husband to provide the alimony?
Maximum amount of alimony or maintenance that can be provided is 33% of the total income of that individual. That is the set law. No, not more than 33% of the total earning can be provided as alimony to the wife. Alimony for children and maintaining the children would be different.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Next, please. I guess it's Lisha.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Lisa. I would like to ask a question that A and B, suppose a husband and wife, and they are in judicial separation, but B has an extramarital affair and B is the wife, and she gets pregnant with C's child. So what are the...
You need to again state it, because I've got confused between A and C and B and D.
Okay, sir. A is the husband and B is the wife. They both are in judicial separation. And B wife gets into extramarital affair with C. So, and she gets pregnant with C's child. What are the legal rights of the child, and will the child be legitimate or illegitimate?
If they are in a living relationship, then it would be a legitimate child. And if they marry and she files for a divorce and then marries the person she's having the child with, it would be a legitimate child.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Deb Smita. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, what is the legitimacy of a child born out of a live-in relationship?
There are controversial aspects to it, but generally it is considered legitimate.
Is there
Most of
a
the judges
specific
that-
law which states that it is?
No, there is no specific law which is stating that. It is the precedents that we are going on. And precedents state that it's a legitimate child. There have been judgments of the Supreme Court and High Court in which the child has been considered legitimate. Yeah, you can ask, please.
Also, sir, is a live-in relationship valid under the Indian laws that we have?
It is not invalid. And
Like, what are the rights of a person? Suppose today a boy and a girl are staying in a live-in relationship, and something happens, like the boy tortures the girl. Like, we have
Domestic
mental
violence
cruelty
laws,
criteria in
domestic-
divorce cases, but that there has to be valid marriage for that. But what if the same thing happens
No,
in a live-in relationship?
it happens in living relationships also. In living relationships, you can go for the domestic violence, plea of domestic violence. It is open for that. There are cases in which
Okay,
maintenance
sir.
is also
Thank
been
you.
granted.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, can you elaborate more on the rights of the child whose parents are going through a divorce, as in the case where the child is a minor and in the case where the child is a major?
So generally till the age of 7, the child is given to the mother for the natural custodianship. After 7 years, there can be, a petition which goes in the favor of the father that he wants the custody of the child. Then the father has the duty to maintain the child. The child has the right to visit both his parents unless a grave cruelty has been proved from side of one of the parents against child. These children generally have all the rights as normal human beings like we have, and they have the father's name also going in them. But generally what happens is the basic trauma comes in. For example, you divorce someone and your child's birth certificate is by the name of the first father. Now that child is calling someone else the father, and on her documentations the name is of somebody else. So it causes a psychological impact on her, that why is this individual's name on the documentations when I don't know her. So in that case, we can go for passing of a gazette notification to get the names changed on the documentation.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Why is there a period of cool down when there is a mutual consent for divorce?
They basically feel that maybe it is a decision which has been taken in the haphazard manner, and they should be given equal opportunity to actually cool down and decide whether they want to stay together or get into a divorce. Maybe it was just a matrimonial quarrel which ended up into a divorce. So that's why they do it. That's why the period of cooling down has been given in, so that a mediation can take place and they can be counseled before ending a marriage, because we in India basically think that marriage is a sacrament.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, please. Rahul Chatwal and Dev Smita. You can ask your questions.
Yes, so my
Sir,
question is,
You
Sir,
can go
so
one by one.
my
Maybe.
question is, suppose in case of a divorce, the man is not earning anything, but the woman is. So in this case, will the woman be asked to pay alimony to man? Has there been any
Yes,
cases like
maintenance
this?
is given by the husband. Maintenance has to be given to the husband if wife was the one maintaining the house.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
so my question is how the amount of child support is determined by the court.
Yeah, it is. There is no as such fixed law for it. Generally, it depends on the court as to what they're deciding on it. So, I can't give you an exact figure key 1,000 rupees is the fixed amount, or 2,000 rupees is the fixed amount, or 5,000 rupees is the fixed amount. So the court decides as to what school the children were going to, what are their daily necessities, what kind of life they were living, what is the earning condition of the father or the person who's maintaining them, and then they come to a conclusion. Who's next?
Sir, actually, I had one more doubt. Sir, what if,
Yeah.
like, if a man is divorced with a woman and the man is not earning, then the man's closest relative or is the person to pay for the woman, right? What if the man is not earning at all and then the man does not have any acquaintances or relatives supporting him?
Then in that case, maintenance is not paid. Generally not paid. Generally, the biggest support that you take for your client is you get him disowned from his family before a divorce case is filed, so that the property cannot be shown on his name. So that's a common practice in practical law.
So I have another question.
Yes, please.
So there is a quote by J. Edgar Hoover that no amount of law enforcement can solve a problem that goes back to the family. So having said that, what is the extent to which the laws provide a satisfactory solution to the parties?
Depends on how you want to interpret it. If according to you, satisfaction is living a happy life after being separated from each other, then I guess 100% satisfaction they'd give. But they give a trauma too. Family disputes are generally not resolved in courts, they just end up in mediations. So we need to understand that these relationships have to be validated, and the issues coming out of them have to be validated. And earlier we had mediations, but mediations are not helping these days because mediations do not have a codified solution to them or written solution to them. That is why laws in India need to be encouraging and need to be separated, and matrimonial courts itself are trained to resolve matrimonial issues. So some extent they are helpful. They resolve 100% issues.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, please, Rahul.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, please.
So where exactly do we stand when it comes to marital rape? As in, like you said, it's hard to prove whether rape took place or not, or else we don't know if the accusation is true or not. So where exactly do we stand when it comes to marital rape in India?
As of now, marital rape has not been criminalized in India. So basic issue for that is we'll have to go to the evidently aspect of it. When a rape in general happens, there are a lot of medical records which can be proved by the MLC that is there, the medical that has been done. In case of marriage, where everything is structured and sexual relationships are common and normal in life, it is hard to prove that something was forced on someone. Marital rape could be anything. Marital rape could be that one person is not willing to cohabitate at that particular time, and you want the cohabitation at the particular time, and you've lured that person into cohabiting with you. that might be termed as rape, marital rape. But as of now, marital rape has not been criminalized, and the stand that courts have taken seems to be controversial. But courts are intelligent enough to come up with something with respect to the marital laws, rape laws. Other than that, the bigger problem is that rapes generally are happening within the family in India. As per the National Crime Bureau's report, 67 or 68% of the rapes that happened last year were actually done by family members who were related to the girls, and they were close family members of the girl. So, this idea of marital rape itself is something very wide, and we need to open up socially, and we need to, work our intellect solution for marital rapes. Marital rapes itself is a crime. You are actually forcing yourself on someone, and a no is a no. So if it is happening even after the no, it is a crime. You don't have
Sir.
who's next?
Sir, acquisition the main reason why marital has not been criminalized, or there's some other reason?
That is right. I cannot, talk because it's a subject matter. So false accusations could be part of it. Another part is that when you take the vows, there are certain vows that we take as a marriage happens. So that but it's something controversial. I myself do not have a clear answer to that, because sometimes what happens is marital rapes have also become an idea of extortion in some cases. You judge, so I want all to read at once. It will give you some more arguments as to marital rapes. They say that when husband and wife, you actually give your souls to each other, you give your each other. There is that kind of excuse in that, but a no is a no. I personally feel if you have been forced into something, it's a crime. Those of you who are writing the questions down, please read them out, because I'm not able to read.
Excuse me, sir.
May I go?
Any one of you can go.
So would you explain me about what is the difference between legitimate and illegitimate with reference of the child born with an external marriage? Affair
If
or
you are in a
marriage?
marriage and it's a valid marriage, you're living together, and the child is born from some third individual, then that's a illegitimate child as per law. For example, if you and your husband are in a happy wedlock and you have a child bearing from C, that child would be illegitimate child of the wife. That's not a legitimate child. When we talk about legitimate child, anybody who's born out of a valid wedlock or through a valid relationship in which you both father and the mother are ready to give the name to the child, that is a legitimate child. The laws with respect to legitimate and illegitimate are very detailed, and if we go into that, we would need another session on that itself, because now legitimacy of child itself has various aspects to it, whether the child is born out of a wedlock, which is or the child is born out of a probatory relationship, then it becomes a illegitimate child. A child generally born out of a rape is illegitimate child. A child born out of a prostitute's womb is also, a illegitimate child. A child born out of someone who was drugged is an illegitimate child. So there are many aspects to it, and law is all about interpretation. It's how you're going to interpret it and make the court understand whether something is legitimate or illegitimate.
So the child born through a surrogacy, so is that a legitimate or illegitimate?
Before the surrogacy laws were surrogacy was banned in India, they were legitimate childs.
Okay, sir.
May I ask my question?
Yeah, you can.
So what about the people who are registering themselves in the matrimonial sites, and after the marriage, the girl is getting to know that the guy who had
who she had married is a fake with a fake background and is not the thought or who he on inside. So what
It can become a consumer dispute
under
also.
what section she can file the case?
Your voice is breaking. Your voice is breaking and I can't really hear you.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Shreya, I think, is basically trying to ask you, what about the fraudulent people registering in the matrimonial sites and creating a fake background under, and she's asking under which section the case can be filed.
That would be criminal breach of trust, section 420. It would be a consumer dispute. Other than that, it would be a void marriage itself because you've been married on the wrong pretext and the consent has been taken out of you on wrong ideological backgrounds and what they're doing and what they're not doing. So that would be a void marriage and can be annulled in the very beginning after the marriage. Other than that, 420 is obviously there. Then pretext of marriage for a lot of such websites are ending up, they lure the woman into marriage, they first get into a physical relationship with them and then they just disappear. So that is basically rape on pretext of marriage is very common on these websites.
Sir, the personal laws have prohibited blood relations, and that's justified. Why does the Special Marriage Act prohibited relations? What is the background of it? Is it on the moral grounds? If it is only on the moral grounds, how justified is that with
No,
jurisprudence?
it is not on moral grounds. It is on scientific grounds. Inbreed depression would cause a lot of genetic disorders in individuals, which would end up in a society with a lot of ailments. People born out of inbreed depression are generally having a lot of physical issues related to because the same family members or close family members have same genetic structure somehow and the diseases will increase and the genetic impairment would actually lead to a society which would not be very sensible. So that is why the Special Marriage Act prohibits same degree of relationships. Even if we are breeding animals, we prefer not to breed them with the same family line because inbred dogs will have more issues and inbreed animals will have more medical issues than those who are bred with separate families.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, sir. With regard to child marriages, right, it's actually allowed under law. But then say a third party is contesting it, saying, you cannot marry a child. Will that person be imprisoned or penalized, or what happens after that? First of all, can a third party intervene in this situation?
Generally, NGOs do intervene in this. Child marriage is legal. Well, it's a voidable marriage, a valid marriage. You cannot married. No, sent to the house of the groom till the age of. So after the age of 18, when they consummate marriage. But in cases the consummation happens at the age of 14, it's obviously a crime and it's child marriage is prohibited under the Indian law.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else?
If anybody else has any questions, you can go ahead, or else we can move on to vote of thanks. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, then. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to call upon Shruti Nag to present the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Srinidhi. First of all, sir, I wish to acknowledge that it was quite hard for our audience to raise questions thanks to your initial talk that was very crisp, in-depth, and simple to understand. The talk began with a soft intro to the personal laws, marriage, divorce, and further covered the debated and miscellaneous topics. As the event name tells, the talk continued with the practical aspects of the matrimonial laws, the legal procedures, the way a case comes to the lawyer, how to investigate the matter, procedures, the way the documents are drafted, and so on. We are grateful to you for your taking us through an experience of handling a case by sharing your work and experience. We are truly thankful to you for your dedication, the care you have taken to ensure that this lecture remains a wonderful experience for us, and to a point that you showed us what a postal receipt looks like. Thank you very much, sir. Further, sir, the statement that you made that the judicial system is not slow, but the advocates delay it for the cash inflow, we would remember the statement and aim to change that culture for a speedy justice. I do, on behalf of the students and faculty of the Christ deemed to be University Pune Lavasa, wish to humbly thank you for your time, patience, efforts, and the wonderful talk by you. Thank you again. I wish to extend my thanks to the Dean and Director of our campus, Reverend Father Dr. Josie P. George, for his guidance and persistence in building the institution to its heights. Thank you, Father. Our head of the department, Professor Dr. Daisy Alexander, works with us as a catalyst of success and growth, and which makes such events and many more possible. Thank you, ma'am, for your constant support. I would also like to thank the faculty in charge for encouraging and supporting the organizing committee at every step of the event, with which the organizing committee has organized this event with zeal and dedication. Further, I wish to thank the academic coordinator who is handling the back end of work of this event, and all other faculty members who motivate and stand with us in making such events happen. Without their support, this event would have not been possible. Thank you, ma'am, and all others. Lastly, the audience, without whom this event would have been incomplete. Thank you for being with us on this occasion, and hope you have had a great time. Kindly let us know your feedbacks by filling the feedback form that will be shared via mail. Thank you all and have a wonderful day ahead.
I would just like to say that if you want to keep on coming up with all these articles and all, you can submit it on the website of Fast Track Legal Solutions or on Instagram. So we encourage students to write a lot about them. So you can follow us on Fast Track Legal Solutions at Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And I would, the questions that you have asked were actually very intriguing, and it's really happy because I realized that you've actually listened to the talk very well. That is why these questions came up. And all the very best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful session.